The fragrance of deception. The rain drummed against the hospital windows like fingers tapping out a funeral dirge. Isabelle pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the droplets race down the surface as tears she couldn't shed, trace similar paths down her cheeks. Behind her, the steady beep of life support machines marked time in her father's room, each sound a reminder of how fragile everything had become. "Stop wallowing!" Celeste's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Your father needs you to be strong now." Isabelle turned to face her stepmother, taking in the woman's perfectly applied makeup despite the early hour. The way her manicured fingers drummed against her Hermes bag. Even in crisis, Celeste maintained her armor of perfection. "The doctors said his condition is stable," Isabelle said quietly. "There's hope." "Hope doesn't pay debts." Celeste's laugh was bitter. "Hope doesn't save Thornfield Aromatics from bankruptcy. Hope doesn't keep us from losing everything your father built." The contract lay spread across the small table between them like an accusation. Marriage certificate, financial agreement, a business merger disguised as romance. Isabelle's hands trembled as she read the terms again, each clause feeling like another chain around her ankles. "Why me?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "It's Evangeline they want." "It's always been Evangeline." Celeste's expression softened for just a moment, revealing something that might have been genuine affection, or perhaps just exhaustion. "Because Evangeline isn't here. Because you're the only one who can save this family now." "But I'm not her. I've never been her." Isabelle's voice cracked on the words. "I don't know how to be the perfect daughter, the charming socialite, You'll learn." Celeste stood, smoothing down her skirt with practiced movements. "You'll have to. The Blackwoods expect Evangeline at that altar tomorrow, and Evangeline is what they'll get." Alone again with her father's unconscious form, Isabelle took his hand in hers. His skin felt paper thin, fragile as the dried rose petals he used to show her in his laboratory when she was small. Before Evangeline came back from Europe, before she became the heir apparent while Isabelle faded into the background. "I don't know how to do this, Papa," she whispered. "I don't know how to be someone else." The machines beeped their mechanical lullaby, offering no answers, no comfort. Only the relentless march of time toward a wedding that would seal her fate. Marcus Blackwood stood in his study, fingers trailing across the leather-bound books he could no longer read. Their titles familiar only through memory and touch. 3 months since the accident. 3 months of stumbling through a world that had become alien overnight, navigating by sound and scent and the reluctant help of others, who saw his blindness as weakness. "The merger documents are ready for your signature," his assistant Robert said from somewhere near the desk. Robert's voice carried that careful tone everyone used now, the voice reserved for broken things. "And the girl, Evangeline?" Marcus asked, though the name felt strange on his tongue. He'd met her only twice before his accident, and both times she'd seemed more interested in her reflection in the window than in conversation. "She'll be here for the ceremony tomorrow. Mr. Blackwood, if you don't mind me saying—" "I do mind." Marcus's voice was sharper than he intended. He softened it. "This isn't about what I want, Robert. It never has been." After Robert left, Marcus made his way to the window by memory and instinct. The garden lay below, invisible to him now but alive in his imagination. He could smell the jasmine his mother had planted there before she died, could hear the fountain's gentle murmur. These things remained unchanged by his condition, small mercies in a world that had shifted beneath his feet. His brother Damien's laughter drifted up from the terrace below, loud and false as it always was at these pre-wedding gatherings. Damien, who'd been circling like a vulture since the accident, waiting for Marcus to stumble badly enough to justify taking over the company. Their father encouraged the competition, had always pitted them against each other like prize dogs, measuring their worth by their usefulness to the Blackwood legacy. Marcus touched the small jade elephant on his windowsill, a gift from a business trip to Thailand years ago. His fingers knew every curve of the carved stone. Soon, he supposed, someone else would be touching his things, rearranging his carefully ordered world. His wife, a stranger. The thought should have filled him with anticipation, or at least curiosity. Instead, he felt only the familiar weight of duty settling heavier on his shoulders. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and oppressive, the sky heavy with unspent rain. Isabelle sat before an ornate mirror in the bridal suite, watching strangers transform her into her sister. The makeup artist painted a different face over her own, bolder eyebrows, darker lips, sharper contouring that made her features more angular, more like Evangeline's. You need to remember, Celeste coached from her position by the window, Evangeline is confident. She doesn't apologize for taking up space. She speaks her mind. Evangeline is also cruel, Isabelle murmured, thinking of childhood memories, dolls with their hair cut off, secret drawings torn and scattered, small cruelties that had taught her early to make herself smaller, quieter, less of a target. Cruelty can be useful, Celeste replied without looking away from her phone. It keeps people at arm's length. It protects you. But Isabelle had never wanted protection that came at the cost of connection. She'd always been the one to bandage injured animals and to remember birthdays and anniversaries others forgot. These instincts felt dangerous now, like cracks in the armor she was trying to construct. The wedding dress was everything she'd never dreamed of, layers of silk and lace that transformed her into a confection, a beautiful lie. As the stylist secured the veil, Isabelle caught sight of her reflection and barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked like Evangeline, moved like Evangeline, smiled with Evangeline's practiced charm. But her eyes still held all of Isabelle's fears. At the chapel, she walked down an aisle lined with faces she didn't recognize, people who thought they knew her, but had never truly seen her at all. At the altar stood Marcus, magnificent even in his stillness. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tailored suit emphasizing broad shoulders and a lean frame. But it was his face that stopped her breath, classical features marked by the particular kind of strength that came from enduring pain without breaking. When she reached him, he extended his hand without hesitation. His fingers were warm and steady, calloused in a way that surprised her, as if he worked with his hands despite his wealth. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, a connection she hadn't anticipated. "Hello, Evangeline," he said, and his voice was deeper than she remembered, rougher around the edges. "Hello, Marcus?" The name felt natural on her lips, more natural than it should have. The ceremony blurred past in a haze of vows and responses that meant nothing and everything. When the officiant pronounced them married, Marcus's lips brushed hers with careful politeness, but even that chaste contact made her heart race in a way that felt like betrayal. Of him, of herself, of the truth buried deeper with every passing moment. Blackwood Manor loomed before them like something from a Gothic novel, all stone towers and leaded windows that reflected the afternoon sky in fragments. Isabelle pressed her face to the car window, taking in the formal gardens, the fountain topped with marble nymphs, the sheer overwhelming scale of wealth she'd never experienced. "Overwhelming?" Marcus asked from beside her, somehow sensing her reaction. "Beautiful," she replied honestly, "but intimidating." He turned toward her, and she realized he did that often, orienting himself toward voices even though he couldn't see the speakers. "You'll get used to it. Eventually, it just becomes home." The word home hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Mrs. Henley, the head housekeeper, greeted them at the entrance with the kind of formal warmth that suggested decades of service. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," she said to Isabelle, the title sounding foreign and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Isabelle's room, Evangeline's room, she reminded herself, was a study in elegant femininity. Pale blue walls, antique furniture, and a four-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. But it was the vanity that drew her attention, its surface covered with perfume bottles that made her breath catch. Victoria Laurent, her own creations, her secret identity displayed like treasures. "I had them brought up from Marcus's collection," Mrs. Henley explained, misinterpreting Isabelle's surprise. "He thought you might appreciate having them closer at hand." That evening, Isabelle found herself in the dining room, a cavernous space that could have seated 30, but held only 2 place settings, at one end of a table long enough for a royal banquet. Marcus sat across from her, navigating his meal with practiced precision that spoke of months of adaptation. "Tell me about your time in Paris," he said, cutting into his salmon with surgical accuracy. Panic fluttered in Isabelle's chest. Evangeline had never been to Paris. That had been Isabelle's refuge, her place of learning and growth. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. What you studied, where you lived, what made you decide to come back." His voice carried genuine curiosity, the first real interest anyone had shown in her experiences in years. So she told him, carefully, selectively, but with growing confidence. She spoke of the École Supérieure de Parfumerie, of learning to identify scent molecules by touch and intuition, of the tiny apartment in the Marais, where she'd first begun creating her own fragrances under the name Victoria Laurent. She simply changed the pronouns, made Evangeline the student instead of herself. Marcus listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his own deep knowledge of perfumery. There's a technique, distillation with liquid carbon dioxide, that I've read produces incredibly pure extracts. Have you experimented with it? Yes, Isabelle breathed, forgetting to be careful. It's revolutionary, but the equipment is so expensive and the yield is initially lower, but the quality... She stopped, realizing she'd spoken with too much passion, too much personal knowledge. Marcus was smiling. You sound like you've done more than experiment. You sound like a true perfumer. Heat crept up her neck. I'm just interested in the family business. More than interested, I think. His unseeing eyes seemed to look right through her. There's something different about you, Evangeline. Something I didn't notice before. Before his accident, when he'd met the real Evangeline. When he'd agreed to marry a woman who viewed perfumery as a means to an end rather than an art form worthy of devotion. People change, she said quietly. Yes, he agreed. They do. The days fell into a routine that felt both natural and impossible. Mornings found Isabelle in the garden, helping Marcus navigate paths he knew by heart, but sometimes forgot in his frustration. She would describe the flowers to him, not just their colors, but their textures, the way the light fell across petals, the subtle differences between varieties of the same species. The roses are opening, she said one morning, guiding his hand to touch a bloom. This one is pale pink at the edges, deepening to coral at the center. The petals feel like silk, but there's strength in them too. His fingers moved carefully over the flower, learning its contours. What does it look like? She leaned closer, inhaling deeply. Like honey and pepper, with something green underneath. Fresh rain on stone. You have a poet's nose, he said, and the compliment sent warmth spreading through her chest. It's how my father taught me, she replied without thinking. He said that scent is the only sense that goes directly to memory and emotion, bypassing the rational mind. To truly understand a fragrance, you have to let it tell you its story. Marcus turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. Your father sounds like a wise man. I'd like to meet him someday. The reminder of her father's condition, the lie that had started all of this, hit her like a physical blow. Yes, someday. Evenings were spent in Marcus's study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books he could no longer read but refused to abandon. She would read to him business reports during the week, literature on weekend nights. His taste ran to complex novels, philosophical treatises, poetry that painted pictures with words. She found herself looking forward to these quiet hours, to the sound of his breathing beside her, to the way he would sometimes reach out and touch her hand when a passage particularly moved him. Read that again, he said one night as she finished a sonnet. She obliged, letting the words roll off her tongue like music. When she finished, the silence stretched between them, comfortable and charged. You have a beautiful voice, he said quietly. I never noticed before. Always before, when he'd known Evangeline, when he'd been able to see. Guilt twisted in her stomach, but it was overwhelmed by something else, a dangerous warmth that grew stronger each day. The physical attraction was undeniable but unspoken. She found herself watching the way his hands moved over objects, learning them by touch. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking. The rare, genuine smile that transformed his face from handsome to breathtaking. She memorized the sound of his laugh, the smell of his cologne, something expensive and understated that complemented rather than overwhelmed his natural scent. And sometimes she caught him listening to her with an intensity that made her wonder what he heard in her voice, her breathing, the small sounds she made as she moved through their shared spaces. I should check on my father, she said one evening, reaching for her phone to call the hospital. Of course, Marcus replied, but his hand caught hers as she stood. Evangeline? Yes? I'm glad you're here. I know this isn't. I know neither of us chose this situation, but I'm grateful it's you. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither dared to examine too closely. Isabelle felt tears prick her eyes. Tears for the kindness he showed her, for the growing love she couldn't acknowledge, for the lies that separated them even as they drew closer each day. "I'm glad too," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Isabelle was arranging flowers in the morning room, humming softly as she worked. The hospital's number on her phone screen sent ice through her veins. "Miss Green, I'm calling about your father. There's been an incident. You should come immediately." She found Marcus in his office dictating correspondence to Robert. "I have to go," she said, her voice tight with panic. "My father, what's wrong?" Marcus was on his feet immediately, reaching for her. "I don't know. The hospital called. They want me to come right away. I'll come with you." "No," she said quickly. "You have the board meeting this afternoon, and the meeting can wait." His voice brooked no argument. "You shouldn't face this alone." The drive to the hospital passed in tense silence. Isabelle's hands shook as she directed the driver through streets she knew by heart. Past the coffee shop where she'd spent so many mornings before her life became this elaborate fiction. Past the bookstore where she'd browsed for hours, looking for the next novel to share with Marcus. At the hospital, chaos greeted them. Her father's room was empty, the bed stripped, medical equipment gone. "Where is he?" Isabelle demanded of the first nurse she found. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be some confusion about the patient transfer." "Transfer? What transfer? No one authorized any transfer." Marcus's hand found her shoulder, steadying her. "Let's find the attending physician. Get some real answers." But the attending physician was as confused as they were. According to the records, William Green had been transferred to a private facility at the family's request. The paperwork bore signatures: Evangeline Green's signature, Celeste's signature. Signatures Isabelle had never made. "This is impossible," she breathed. "I never signed anything. I never requested." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Evangeline was back, and she was cleaning up loose ends. In the car, Marcus held her as she shook with fury and fear. "We'll find him," he said fiercely. "I promise you we'll find him." But Isabelle knew with cold certainty that this was just the beginning. Evangeline wouldn't be content with just reclaiming their father. She would want everything, including the husband who should have been hers all along. She appeared at the manor 3 days later, arriving in a chauffeur-driven Bentley like something from a movie. Isabelle watched from an upstairs window as her twin sister stepped onto the gravel drive, every movement calculated for maximum impact. Evangeline wore a white Chanel suit that emphasized her figure, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the long journey. Seeing her sister after so many months was like looking into a funhouse mirror, the same features but sharper, colder, more polished. Evangeline moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything she truly wanted. Marcus was in the garden when she arrived, so it fell to Mrs. Henley to greet the unexpected visitor. Isabelle crept to the top of the stairs, straining to hear the conversation in the foyer below. "Good afternoon," Evangeline's voice carried clearly. "I'm Evangeline Green. I believe you know me as Mrs. Blackwood." The silence that followed was deafening. "I'm sorry, miss, but Mrs. Blackwood is already here." "No." Evangeline's laugh was like crystal breaking. "My dear sister has been playing a delightful game, but playtime is over. I've come to reclaim my husband." Isabelle's blood turned to ice. She flew down the stairs, arriving in the foyer just as Evangeline was examining a family portrait with proprietary interest. "Hello, Izzy," Evangeline said without turning around. "Lovely home you've been keeping warm for me. What do you want?" Isabelle's voice was barely above a whisper. "What's mine?" Evangeline turned, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "My name, my marriage, my life. You've had your fun, but surely you didn't think this little charade could last forever. Where is our father?" "Safe. Receiving the medical care he needs, unlike the neglect he was getting in that dreadful public hospital." Evangeline adjusted her purse strap with delicate precision. "I must thank you, darling. Your little performance has been quite informative. I had no idea Marcus could be so attentive when properly motivated." The words hit Isabelle like blows. "You've been watching us." "Of course. Did you really think I'd let you stumble around in my life without supervision?" Evangeline's laugh was musical and terrible. "Oh, the tender moments in the garden. The cozy evenings in the study. You've done an admirable job of seducing my husband, sister. It's not like that, isn't it?" Evangeline stepped closer, and Isabelle could smell her perfume, something heavy and cloying that made her nauseous. You've always been so desperate for affection, haven't you? Always wondering why Papa loved me more, why I was the chosen one. Well, now you know how it feels to have something wonderful, and now you know how it feels to lose it. Evangeline, please, Mrs. Blackwood. Mrs. Henley's voice cut through the tension. Master Marcus is asking for you in the study. Both sisters turned toward her, and Mrs. Henley's face went pale as she registered the impossible sight before her. Okay, Evangeline said smoothly. I'll be right there. She walked toward the study with the confidence of ownership, leaving Isabelle standing frozen in the foyer. After a moment, voices carried from behind the closed door. Evangeline's musical laugh, Marcus's deeper tones, the sound of her sister reclaiming everything Isabelle had never truly been allowed to have. Isabelle fled to the garden, her sanctuary, where the jasmine's scent couldn't quite mask the smell of her own fear. She sat on the bench where she'd spent so many mornings with Marcus, watching the fountain and trying to breathe through the pain. That felt like drowning. She should run, pack her few belongings and disappear before this got any worse. Return to her old life, her real life, as if these weeks had been nothing more than an elaborate dream. But the thought of leaving Marcus, of abandoning him to Evangeline's manipulations, made her physically ill. Footsteps on gravel announced his approach before she saw him. He walked carefully but confidently along the familiar path, his expression troubled. Evangeline, he called, I'm here. The lie came automatically now, as natural as breathing. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I just heard some strange news from someone claiming to be your sister. What did she tell you? Oh, Marcus was surprised. So she's indeed your sister. He paused and then continued. She said she's been away dealing with a family emergency, and so she missed the wedding. But that's not the absurd part. How so? Isabelle forced the words past the constriction in her throat, although she knew exactly what she must have said. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his unseeing gaze fixed on some point beyond the fountain. The woman in my study just now, she said she should have been my bride, and you took her place. He paused to hear her response, maybe for clarity, but Isabelle was awkwardly quiet. How would she explain herself and confirm her half-sister's claim? Well, Marcus continued after a long pause, sensing Isabelle's unease with the strange conversation. I told her I'm not interested in whatever family drama she was here to narrate, so I put her off my property. Isabelle finally let out the breath she had been holding, grateful that Marcus made no meaning of Evangeline's visit, at least not yet. But you, he continued, turning toward her, do you not mind me being hostile to your sister? I sensed you are not so close since she was nowhere around you until now. She's my half-sister, actually, and we really didn't get along well since childhood. Isabelle replied with care. Marcus nodded, and they both sat in silence for what seemed to Isabelle like an eternity. Then he carefully moved closer to her, and his hand found hers on the bench between them. I need to tell you something, he said urgently, before I lose my nerve. You make me feel like the world is still beautiful these past few weeks, even though I can't see it. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Marcus, these moments with you, they've been the happiest of my life. I know this marriage was arranged. I know we barely knew each other before, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. With your voice, your kindness, the way you see beauty in everything around us. The words she'd longed to hear were daggers in her heart, because they weren't meant for her. They were meant for Evangeline, for the woman she'd been pretending to be. You don't know me, she whispered. I know everything that matters. I know you're afraid of the dark, but brave enough to face anything else. I know you smell like bergamot and white tea, and that scent has become home to me. She was sobbing now, ugly tears that shook her whole body. Marcus gathered her into his arms, sensing her distress. It's all right, he murmured against her hair. Whatever's frightening you, we'll face it together. I love you, Evangeline, I love you. And there it was, the name that wasn't hers, the love that could never truly be hers, the future that was already slipping away like water through her fingers. 2 weeks passed in fragile peace. Evangeline had vanished as suddenly as she'd appeared, but Isabelle knew her sister well enough to understand this was merely a strategic retreat. The calm before the storm. The storm arrived in the form of an invitation to the Whitmore Foundation Gala, the social event of the season, held at the grand Whitmore estate. Every influential family in the city would be there, including all of Marcus's business associates and potential partners. "We could decline," Marcus suggested when the invitation arrived, sensing Isabelle's tension. "No," she said firmly. "If we don't attend, people will talk. Your business relationships matter too much." What she didn't say was that hiding would only give Evangeline more time to plan, more opportunity to control the narrative. Better to face whatever was coming in a public setting where outright cruelty would be harder to disguise. The night of the gala, Isabelle chose her dress with military precision, a deep emerald silk that complemented her coloring, while projecting strength and sophistication. Marcus looked magnificent in his tuxedo, every inch the successful businessman despite his disability. The Whitmore estate was a glittering fairy tale of chandeliers and marble floors, filled with the cream of society. Isabelle recognized faces from business magazines and society pages: the Cartwrights, the Ashfords, the Vanderburgs. Old money and new power mingled under crystal light. They'd been there less than an hour when Isabelle spotted her. Evangeline stood near the champagne fountain, resplendent in white silk that made her look like an avenging angel. She was surrounded by a small court of admirers, holding court with practiced ease. "She's here," Isabelle whispered to Marcus. "Who?" "My sister." "The woman who came to the house." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "We can leave if you won't be comfortable around her." No, I already knew this might happen, but what she hadn't anticipated was how perfectly Evangeline had positioned herself. As the evening progressed, it became clear that she'd been working the room systematically, introducing herself to key figures as the real Evangeline Green, Marcus's wife, who'd been away on family business. The trap was sprung during the dinner portion of the evening. Isabelle and Marcus were seated at a prominent table with the Cartwrights and several other business leaders when the host, Senator Whitmore, stood to address the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special surprise tonight. I'd like to introduce a talented young perfumer who's been making waves in the industry, Victoria Laurent." Isabelle's blood turned to ice as applause rippled through the room. Evangeline rose from her seat at a nearby table, acknowledging the crowd with gracious waves. "Miss Laurent has graciously agreed to tell us about her latest collection," the senator continued. As Evangeline took the microphone, her eyes found Isabelle across the room. Her smile was radiant and deadly. "Thank you so much for this honor," Evangeline began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom. "I'm so grateful to share my passion with all of you tonight. Perfumery, as you know, is an art of transformation, of taking raw materials and creating something entirely new, entirely different from what came before." The metaphor was clear to anyone who knew the truth. My latest collection is particularly close to my heart because it explores themes of identity and authenticity. What happens when someone tries to become someone they're not, when they steal not just a name but an entire life? Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd as people sensed drama beneath the artistic discussion. "You see," Evangeline continued, her voice growing stronger, "I recently discovered that someone has been using my name, my reputation, my very identity for their own gain. Someone very close to me, who thought they could simply step into my life and claim everything I'd worked for." Isabelle felt the walls closing in around her. Beside her, Marcus had gone very still. It's devastating to learn that even family, especially family, can betray you so completely. Evangeline's eyes were locked on Isabelle now, her smile never wavering. But truth has a way of emerging, doesn't it? No matter how carefully someone constructs their lies, reality eventually breaks through. The crowd was captivated now, sensing they were witnessing something explosive. "I stand before you tonight not as Victoria Laurent, the perfumer, but as Evangeline Green, recently married to Marcus Blackwood." Her voice rang with triumph, "And I want everyone to know that the woman who has been posing as his wife, the woman sitting at that table right now, is not me." She pointed directly at Isabelle, and every head in the ballroom turned. "She is my half-sister Isabelle, who has been living my life, sleeping in my bed, and stealing my husband's affections through an elaborate deception that ends tonight." The silence that followed Evangeline's declaration was deafening. Every face in the ballroom was turned toward their table, eyes wide with shock and fascination. Isabelle felt exposed under their stares like an animal caught in a trap. Beside her, Marcus had gone completely still. She could feel the tension radiating from his body, could sense the wheels turning in his mind as he processed what had just been revealed. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing murmur of voices. He stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the hushed ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you've had to witness this family drama. This woman is clearly unwell and needs professional help." His tone was ice-cold, utterly composed. "I suggest we allow the evening to continue as planned," but Evangeline wasn't finished. "Unwell?" she laughed, the sound sharp as breaking crystal. "Marcus, darling, I understand you can't tell the difference between two people. But surely you've noticed that your wife isn't the same woman you agreed to marry." "The woman I married is standing right beside me," Marcus replied firmly, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop disrupting this gathering with your delusions." The crowd was riveted now, torn between embarrassment and fascination. Some were already reaching for their phones, no doubt preparing to document what would surely become the scandal of the season. Evangeline's smile never wavered, but Isabelle could see the fury building behind her eyes. "Very well, perhaps a demonstration will help clear things up." She moved through the crowd with predatory grace, stopping just a few feet from their table. "Tell me, Marcus, did your wife tell you she'd been to Paris?" "Yes," Marcus said carefully, "but I fail to see how that proves anything." "Oh, but it does." Evangeline's voice was triumphant. "You see, the real Evangeline Green was never in Paris. She's never been to Europe at all. She spent those years in a rehabilitation facility in Switzerland, recovering from a rather unfortunate addiction problem. Something our family kept very quiet, for obvious reasons." The words hit Isabelle like physical blows. She'd forgotten. In all the years since Evangeline's return, she'd forgotten about those missing years, the explanation that had never quite made sense. "However," Evangeline continued, "Isabelle, my dear, talented, invisible sister, she did study in Paris. She learned perfumery there and spent 4 years becoming Victoria Laurent." The name dropped like a bomb in the sudden silence. Isabelle could feel Marcus's shock like a living thing beside her. "That's right." Evangeline's voice rose in triumph. "The mysterious Victoria Laurent, whose work you so admire. Marcus, that's my sister. The woman who's been lying to you about everything, who stole my name and my life, happens to be one of the most celebrated perfumers in the world. Rather ironic, don't you think?" For a moment that lasted an eternity, Marcus said nothing. His unseeing eyes seemed to look right through her, and she could see him processing everything, every conversation, every shared moment, every declaration of love, through this new lens of truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, though she could hear the pain underneath. "You're wrong," he said quietly, and the words were clearly meant for Evangeline, though the entire ballroom could hear them. "I don't know what your game is, but you're not my wife, and you will never be. Security, please escort her out." Evangeline's composure finally cracked. "You can't be serious. She's nothing. She's a fraud. I'm your legal wife." "No," Marcus said firmly. "You're a stranger who's been trying to steal my actual wife's identity, and this ends now." As security moved toward Evangeline, she turned her fury on Isabelle. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You think you can steal my life? You think you deserve happiness? You're nothing, Isabelle. You've always been nothing, and deep down, you know it." After Evangeline was escorted out, the crowd finally relaxed, and many commended Marcus for protecting his wife. Marcus was clearly shaken, but maintained his composure, his heart racing as his thoughts grew wild. "Isabelle?" he thought. "Is that her real name?" He couldn't help but wonder what more mystery surrounds this woman that had been the closest to him, and made him think he deserves a chance at love and happiness. Isabelle was quiet all through with an unreadable expression, and at the end of the gala, she was the first to excuse herself and walk towards the door. Marcus quickly followed her as he called his chauffeur. The ride home was equally a very quiet one, with both of them processing their thoughts individually. Marcus's imaginations knew no bound, and so was his hurt. Part of him did not want to believe the absurd claims, and he really wished he had never even heard. Isabelle went straight to her room and laid in bed. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settling around her. Sleep was impossible as her mind raced through scenarios, each more devastating than the last. Evangeline had revealed her identity as Victoria Laurent, but only after poisoning the well with her deception. Marcus had to learn in a public gathering that his wife was not only an imposter, but also, in Evangeline's version, a woman who had built her career on seduction and deception. She knew he had protected her there to save face in front of people who held him in high esteem, but he couldn't hide his hurt from her. The soft knock at her door made her heart leap. "Come in." Marcus entered, moving carefully in the darkness. "I saw your light was still on." She sat up, pulling her robe around herself. "I couldn't sleep. Neither could I." He closed the door behind him and made his way to the chair beside her bed. "We need to talk." Her throat closed with fear. "Yes. Your half-sister." His voice was quiet, measured. "She claimed to be my wife, the one I was engaged to." Isabelle's world tilted on its axis. "Marcus, you're not Evangeline, are you?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge over an abyss. Isabelle couldn't possibly maintain the deception that had become a prison around her heart. She could finally tell the truth. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already known. "Who are you?" Isabelle Green." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I never meant for this to happen. My father was in the hospital, and Evangeline was gone, and they needed someone to go through with the marriage to save the family company. And I thought it would just be for a little while, just until what? Until Evangeline came back, until my father recovered, until I could find a way out that didn't destroy everyone I cared about." She was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. "I never meant to fall in love with you. I never meant for any of this to become real." Marcus was silent for a long time, processing this revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "I can't believe you've been lying to me. Your name, your history, your feelings, all of them were lies." "No!" the denial burst from her with desperate force. "My feelings were never lies. Everything I told you about perfumery, about art, about my dreams, those were true." Isabelle sobbed. "Victoria Laurent," he said suddenly. "What?" "You're Victoria Laurent, aren't you? That's why you know so much about perfumery. That's why my collection meant so much to you." She nodded miserably. "Yes, I've been Victoria Laurent since I was 19. It's how I supported myself, how I funded my education. It's the only thing that was ever truly mine." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "So when I told you I loved you, you knew I was talking to someone who didn't exist." "You were talking to me," she protested. "The person who read to you, who walked with you in the garden, who learned to love you, that was me, Marcus. That was always me, but under someone else's name, in someone else's life." He turned back toward her, and the pain in his expression was devastating. "Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that the person you love is a fiction?" "I'm not a fiction," she said desperately. "I'm real. What we had together was real. What we had together was based on a lie." The words hit her like physical blows. She stood reaching for him, but he stepped back. "Please," she whispered. "Let me explain. Let me tell you everything." "I need time," he said, his voice hollow. "I need time to think." He left without another word, closing the door with terrible gentleness. Isabelle collapsed onto her bed, finally allowing herself to grieve for the love she'd found and lost in the space of a single conversation. Dawn found Isabelle in the garden, sitting on the bench where she'd shared so many quiet moments with Marcus. The jasmine hung heavy in the morning air, almost cloying in its sweetness. She'd packed her few belongings. She couldn't stay here now, couldn't torture herself with proximity to a man who saw her as nothing, but an elaborate deception. "Running away, darling?" Evangeline's voice cut through the morning silence like a blade through silk. She stood at the garden gate, perfectly groomed despite the early hour, watching Isabelle with predatory satisfaction. "How did you get in here?" Isabelle asked with weariness. "Oh, I have my ways, dear sister. I am family after all." She spat with so much bitterness, looking at her hand with mischief. "Going somewhere?" Evangeline stepped onto the gravel path, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm. "How disappointing. I was so looking forward to our little family reunion." Isabelle stood slowly, her overnight bag clutched in white-knuckled hands. "You have what you wanted. Marcus knows the truth. There's nothing left for me here." "Oh, but there's so much left." Evangeline's smile was razor-sharp. "We haven't even gotten to the best part yet. A chill ran down Isabelle's spine. What are you talking about? Did you really think I'd let you slink away into obscurity? After you've played house with my husband for months? Evangeline pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like photographs. I have such interesting documentation of your little charade. Marcus holding your hand. Marcus kissing you goodbye. Marcus looking at you like you hung the moon. The blood drained from Isabelle's face. You've been watching us. Every intimate moment, every stolen kiss, every whispered endearment. Evangeline's laugh was musical poison. Do you know what the tabloids would pay for photos of the Blackwood heir's secret affair? Especially when they learn his mysterious lover is actually a fraud who's been masquerading as his own wife? It wasn't an affair, Isabelle said desperately. I was married to him, under false pretenses, using my identity, which by the way is identity theft, a felony. Evangeline stepped closer, her voice dropping to a silky whisper. I could destroy you completely, darling sister. Your precious Victoria Laurent brand, your reputation, your freedom. One phone call to the right people, and you'd spend the next decade in prison. Isabelle's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the garden gate for support. What do you want? What I've always wanted, what should have been mine from the beginning. Evangeline's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing raw hunger underneath. I want Marcus to love me the way he loved you. I want him to look at me with that desperate adoration I saw in those photographs. You can't force someone to love you. Can't I? Evangeline's smile returned, cold as winter. Love is just brain chemistry, Izzy. The right triggers, the right associations, the right manipulations. You managed to make him fall for a lie. I'll simply make him forget the lie ever existed. How? Evangeline's eyes glittered with malicious triumph. Have you heard of scopolamine? Fascinating substance. In small doses, it causes memory loss, confusion, suggestibility. The victim remains conscious but becomes extremely susceptible to suggestion. They can be convinced that false memories are real, that their own feelings are different than they actually are. Horror crashed over Isabelle like a cold wave. You're talking about drugging him. I'm talking about helping him heal from the trauma of your deception. Poor Marcus, so confused by conflicting memories. So grateful when his loving wife helps him remember their beautiful courtship, their perfect wedding night, their months of happiness together. Evangeline examined her manicured nails with clinical detachment. Dr. Reeves, such a helpful man, so concerned about Marcus's psychological recovery from his accident, has already prescribed the medication. For his anxiety, you understand. He'll figure it out. Someone will notice. Who? His devoted wife caring for him so tenderly? His staff who've been told he's suffering from PTSD-related memory issues? Evangeline shrugged elegantly. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it will be far too late. Marcus will remember only what I want him to remember. Isabelle felt sick to her stomach. You're insane. I'm practical. You showed me how to make Marcus happy, and now I'm going to replicate that happiness with the correct leading lady. Evangeline checked her diamond watch. You have 1 hour to disappear completely. Delete your social media, close your bank accounts, abandon Victoria Laurent forever. If I see any trace of you after today, I'll destroy you and everyone you care about, including our dear father. Where is he? I want to see him. He's safe, for now. But his medical care is so expensive, isn't it? And his new private facility is so very exclusive. The kind of place where accidents happen if bills go unpaid. The threat was delivered with the same tone Evangeline might use to discuss the weather. Tears blurred Isabelle's vision. How can you be so cruel? I learned from the best. For just a moment, Evangeline's composure cracked, revealing something raw and wounded underneath. Do you think I enjoyed growing up in your shadow? Perfect Isabelle, so kind and talented. Everyone's favorite. Even Papa loved you more, though he tried to hide it. That's not true. It is true. The words exploded from Evangeline with venomous force. He lit up when you walked into a room. He bragged about your artistic talent to anyone who would listen. When you ran away to Paris, he cried. When I left for Europe, he barely noticed. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I've spent my whole life trying to earn what you got simply by existing. The revelation hung between them like a wound exposed to air. Isabelle saw her sister clearly for the first time, not just the polished socialite, but the broken woman underneath, desperate for love and willing to destroy anything in her path to get it. Evangeline, no, her sister's mask slammed back into place. I'm done being second choice. 1 hour, Isabelle. Don't make me come looking for you. Isabelle sat in her rented car at the edge of the Blackwood estate, hands shaking as she tried to think through her impossible situation. She could run, disappear forever, and let Evangeline slowly poison Marcus's mind until he believed he'd always loved her. Or she could stay and fight, knowing that doing so would likely destroy not just herself but everyone she cared about. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Your father says hello. Such a shame if his medication got mixed up." A photo followed, her father in a hospital bed, looking frail and helpless, with Evangeline's manicured hand visible at the edge of the frame. Fury and terror warred in Isabelle's chest. She couldn't abandon Marcus to Evangeline's manipulations, but she couldn't sacrifice her father either. There had to be another way. She drove to the small investigative firm she'd found online, run by a woman named Sarah Chen, who specialized in corporate espionage and fraud cases. Sarah was young, sharp-eyed, and unimpressed by wealth or social status. Identity theft, coercion, possible drugging, Sarah summarized after listening to Isabelle's story. "Your sister's certainly ambitious. The scopolamine angle is particularly nasty, hard to prove, leaves minimal traces, and the victim often doesn't remember being drugged. Can you help me?" "Depends. How much evidence do you have?" Isabelle handed over her phone, showing the threatening texts, the photo of her father. "And I know where she's keeping him, Meadowbrook Private Care. She mentioned Dr. Reeves." Sarah nodded grimly. "I know Meadowbrook. They've had complaints before. Families coerced into expensive treatments. Patients kept longer than necessary for financial reasons. Very hard to prove, very well connected." She leaned back in her chair. "What's your endgame here? Just exposing your sister, or do you want your life back? I want Marcus safe. Everything else is secondary. Even if that means he never forgives you for the deception?" The question cut deep. Even then, Sarah smiled for the first time. "Good. That tells me you're serious. Give me 48 hours. I'll need you to get me inside the house during that time. Can you manage it?" "Evangeline banned me from the property. Then we'll have to get creative." 3 days passed in the manor like a funeral procession. Marcus moved through the halls like a ghost of himself, his fingers trailing along familiar walls that felt foreign now, searching for traces of a presence that was no longer there. The house felt hollow without Isabelle's humming in the morning room, without her voice reading to him in the evenings, without the subtle scent of bergamot and white tea that had become his compass in the darkness. Mrs. Henley found him in the garden on the second morning, sitting motionless on the bench where he and Isabelle had shared so many quiet moments. The jasmine was in full bloom, but its sweetness felt cloying without her voice to describe its beauty. "Master Marcus," she said gently, "you haven't touched your breakfast?" "I'm not hungry." His voice was hoarse from disuse. He'd spoken to no one since Isabelle left, had barely acknowledged Robert's attempts to discuss business matters. "Perhaps you should eat something anyway." "Keep your strength up," Marcus laughed bitterly. "For what, so I can stumble through another day pretending all is well?" Mrs. Henley sat beside him on the bench, her presence warm and familiar. She'd known him since he was a boy, had seen him through his parents' deaths, his accident, his arranged marriage. She'd never seen him like this, broken not by external circumstances, but by the loss of something he'd only just discovered he couldn't live without. "She's not gone forever," the older woman said quietly. "Isn't she?" Marcus turned his unseeing gaze toward the fountain, remembering how Isabelle had described the water catching the light. "She lied to me, Mrs. Henley, about everything. Her name, her identity, her reasons for being here. How do I know anything between us was real?" "Because I watched you both, Mrs. Henley replied firmly. "I saw how she looked at you when she thought no one was watching. I saw how carefully she learned your routines, your preferences, your moods. That wasn't duty or deception, Master Marcus. That was love. Love built on lies. Love built on truth," she corrected. "The truth of who you both are underneath all the names and circumstances." She may have worn her sister's identity, but she couldn't wear her sister's heart. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently touching the jade elephant he'd brought out from his study. The small carved stone felt warm from his constant handling, a talisman against the emptiness that had settled in his chest. "I should go after her," he said finally. "Find her, demand explanations, fight for what I thought we had. But you won't. It wasn't a question. Mrs. Henley knew him too well. No, he admitted. She left because she thought it was better than facing me every day. She has probably done what she did, sacrificing for her dad's sake. How can I dishonor that sacrifice by dragging her back into this mess? And if she's miserable without you? If she's somewhere crying herself to sleep the way you're doing? The possibility cut through him like a blade, but he forced himself to remain still. Then she'll heal because she's stronger than she knows. Mrs. Henley stood, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. You're a good man, Master Marcus, sometimes too good for your own happiness. After she left, Marcus remained in the garden until the afternoon shadows grew long. He tried to imagine Isabelle somewhere safe, somewhere she could be herself without pretense or fear. The thought should have brought him comfort, but it only made the ache in his chest grow deeper. That evening, he sat alone in his study, surrounded by books he could no longer read and memories he couldn't escape. The chair where Isabelle used to sit while reading to him seemed to mock him with its emptiness. Her favorite poetry book lay closed on the side table, a bookmark still marking their place in sonnets from the Portuguese. He reached for it with trembling fingers, opening to the page she'd marked. His fingers traced the lines of Braille he'd had transcribed years ago, finding the poem that had made her voice catch the last time she'd read it. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. A sound in the doorway made him look up. Robert? I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. There's a woman here to see you. She says she's Mrs. Blackwood. Marcus's heart stopped. For one impossible moment, he thought Isabelle had returned. But then reason reasserted itself. Isabelle would never announce herself by that name, and Robert would have recognized her voice. Send her in. The footsteps that approached were different, sharper, more deliberately placed. The scent that preceded her was wrong too. Roses and amber instead of bergamot and white tea. Heavy perfume designed to make an impression rather than complement natural beauty. Hello, Marcus. The voice was Isabelle's, but not Isabelle's. The same tone and pitch, but lacking the warmth, the gentle humor, the unconscious poetry that had made every conversation feel like music. Evangeline, he said quietly, I wondered when you'd return. She moved into the room with predatory grace, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Marcus tracked her movement by sound, noting how differently she navigated the space, like a visitor rather than someone who belonged. I came as soon as I heard, she said, settling into the chair Isabelle had claimed as her own. My poor darling, taken advantage of by my disturbed sister. You must have been so confused. Marcus remained perfectly still. Were you confused, I mean? When you were calling her out at the gala? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Evangeline's laugh was musical, but somehow hollow. It was a necessary evil. My sister refused to let go when I met her personally, so she left me no option. Her voice carried conviction, but Marcus had learned to listen for the spaces between words. I see, he said neutrally. And do you happen to know where Isabelle is? Gone, thankfully. Back to whatever pathetic life she was living before she decided to play dress-up in mine. The venom that crept into Evangeline's voice was the first genuine emotion he'd heard from her. I'm sorry you had to endure her delusions. She's always been unstable, even as a child. Marcus thought of Isabelle's gentle hands guiding him through the garden, her patient voice describing flowers and light and beauty. Unstable was the last word he would use to describe her. She seemed quite sane to me, he said carefully. Of course she would. She's cunning, I'll give her that. She probably studied my mannerisms and my preferences. It would be easy enough to fool someone who... Evangeline caught herself before finishing the sentence. Someone who can't see the difference? I didn't mean to suggest. It's all right. Marcus leaned back in his chair, suddenly exhausted. You're probably right. I was an easy target for deception. He heard Evangeline rise from her chair, moving closer. Her perfume grew stronger, almost overwhelming in its intensity. Don't worry, I'm here now to take good care of my husband. I thought I might take over preparing my husband's tea. Such a wifely duty, don't you think? Evangeline's smile was sugar-sweet, but her eyes held steel. Mrs. Henley's hands stilled on the teapot. Master Marcus is particular about his tea, ma'am. The water temperature, the steeping time. I'm sure I can manage. After all, I am his wife. The emphasis was subtle but unmistakable. I'd like to take special care of him after everything he's endured. Of course, ma'am. Mrs. Henley stepped aside, but her eyes remained watchful. He prefers Earl Grey in the afternoon. steeped for exactly 4 minutes. No milk, but he'll take honey if his throat is bothering him. How thoughtful of you to remember such details. Evangeline began assembling the tea service with practiced elegance. I'll handle this from now on. Marcus needs the comfort of his wife's personal attention, so you can leave now. As Mrs. Henley left the kitchen, Evangeline allowed herself a small smile of triumph. Phase 1 complete, established dominance over the household routines. Phase 2 would require more delicate work. From her purse, she withdrew a small crystal vial filled with white powder, scopolamine, acquired through her carefully cultivated connections in Switzerland's more shadowy pharmaceutical circles. The drug was perfect for her purposes. It would cause memory confusion and increase suggestibility without leaving obvious traces. In small, regular doses, it would make Marcus increasingly dependent on her version of events, her memories, her reality. She measured a tiny amount into his teacup, just enough to create mild disorientation without obvious impairment. The powder dissolved instantly, leaving no trace of its presence. When she was D, she carried the tea tray to Mrs. Henley, so Marcus wouldn't be suspicious. Mrs. Henley, kindly take this to him. Her proud look was replaced with fake humility that couldn't fool anyone. The truth is, Marcus isn't into me that much, at least for now, and I don't want him rejecting his tea because of me, so I'll be needing your help for a while. Mrs. Henley didn't buy the lie for a bit, but she couldn't reject Mrs. Blackwood when Marcus himself couldn't do away with her. She thought to herself and took the tray, heading for Mr. Blackwood's study. Sir, your tea. She set the tray on the small table beside his chair. Thank you. He reached for the cup and took a sip as she takes her leave. Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a calculated risk, and she was overjoyed it worked. Over the following days, she refined her technique. A small dose in his morning coffee to start the day with mild compliance. Another in his afternoon tea to reinforce the effects. Never enough to make him obviously impaired, just enough to make him doubt his own memories and rely increasingly on her guidance. The changes were subtle at first. Marcus would pause mid-conversation, looking confused about something he'd just said. He'd ask about business meetings that had never happened, or forget conversations from earlier that same day. Each time, Evangeline was there with gentle correction, helpful reminders, loving concern for his recovery from the stress of recent events. It was obvious he had forgotten his weariness and threats to this woman beside him. Did we discuss the quarterly reports yesterday? He asked over breakfast on her 5th day back, his brow furrowed with uncertainty. Yes, darling, you said they could wait until next week. The lie came easily, accompanied by a concerned touch to his hand. You've been under so much stress. It's natural that some details might slip your mind. Marcus nodded slowly, accepting her word without question. She began rewriting their history with surgical precision. The evening walks in the garden became romantic strolls they'd shared before his accident. The quiet dinners became intimate conversations from their courtship. The poetry readings became a cherished tradition from their early marriage, though she was careful never to actually read to him, claiming her throat was sore or that she preferred simply talking. Do you remember, she would say, curling up beside him on the sofa, how we used to spend hours just talking about your travels? You told me the most fascinating stories about Thailand, about that little jade elephant you brought back. Marcus would nod uncertainly, his drugged mind struggling to separate real memories from manufactured ones. The scopolamine made him suggestible, eager to please, desperate to fill the gaps in his recollection with whatever narrative she provided. I'm sorry, he would murmur. My memory has been so unreliable lately. Thank you for being patient with me. It's perfectly natural, darling. Trauma affects the mind in mysterious ways. But I'm here to help you remember, Mrs. Henley watched these interactions with growing unease. But what could she say? The woman was legally Marcus's wife, had every right to care for him as she saw fit. And Marcus himself seemed content enough, if somewhat more subdued and confused than usual. By the 2nd week of Evangeline's return, the process was well underway. Marcus could no longer clearly distinguish between his memories with Isabelle and the false memories Evangeline was constructing. The woman who had read him poetry with a voice like music, surely that had been Evangeline, his devoted wife. The gentle hands that had guided him through the garden describing flowers with a poet's tongue, obviously his beloved, helping him adjust to his blindness, the bergamot and white tea scent that had become home to him, a confusion brought on by stress and trauma. His real wife smelled of roses and amber, expensive and intoxicating, didn't she? Most insidiously, the deep emotional connection he'd felt, the sense of being truly known and understood, Evangeline claimed credit for that too. "We've always had such a profound connection," she would murmur as she massaged his temples after particularly strong doses. "Soulmates, you used to say. 2 hearts beating as one." Marcus would nod drowsily, the scopolamine making him pliant and grateful for her care. The specific memories were becoming hazy, but the emotions remained, and Evangeline was skillfully redirecting those feelings toward herself. Within 3 weeks of her return, Marcus could barely remember the woman who had truly saved him from his darkness. The scopolamine had done its work, blurring the lines between reality and fiction until only Evangeline's version of events remained, clear in his compromised mind. And still she continued the doses, determined to erase every trace of Isabelle from Marcus's memory, to make herself the only woman he could ever remember loving. "Mrs. Henley answered the service entrance with suspicious eyes, but her expression softened when she recognized Isabelle despite the dark wig and oversized sunglasses. "Miss Isabelle, what are you doing here? I need your help, Mrs. Henley. Marcus is in danger." The older woman glanced nervously over her shoulder. "The new Mrs. Blackwood said you weren't to be allowed on the property. Please, just listen to me for 5 minutes." Something in Isabelle's voice must have convinced her because Mrs. Henley stepped aside to let her into the kitchen. Sarah followed, dressed as a cable repair technician with a convincing uniform and clipboard. "Master Marcus has been different since yesterday," Mrs. Henley admitted reluctantly. "Confused. He asked me 3 times this morning what day it was, and he couldn't remember where he keeps his coffee cups." Isabelle's heart sank. It was starting already. "Mrs. Henley, I need you to understand something very important," Isabelle said urgently. "The woman calling herself Mrs. Blackwood, she's not the person Marcus married. She's my twin sister, and she's been drugging him." The housekeeper's eyes went wide. That's impossible." Sarah stepped forward. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe your employer is being given scopolamine, a drug that causes memory loss and makes the victim highly suggestible. Left unchecked, it could cause permanent brain damage." Mrs. Henley sank into a kitchen chair. "The tea. She's been making his tea herself, won't let anyone else touch it. Says she wants to take special care of him after everything he's been through." "Where is he now?" Isabelle asked. "In his study with her. She's been reading to him, the same stories you used to read, but she keeps stopping to remind him of things that I don't remember happening." Sarah was already moving, unpacking her equipment. "I need to get recording devices in that room. Mrs. Henley, can you create a distraction? I don't know if I should be involved in this." Isabelle caught the older woman's hands. "Mrs. Henley, you've known Marcus his whole life. You've seen how happy he was these past months. That happiness was real. It was with me, not her. She's stealing his memories, his feelings, his very identity. If we don't stop her now, the Marcus we love will disappear forever." Tears filled the housekeeper's eyes. "What do you need me to do?" 20 minutes later, Mrs. Henley knocked on the study door. "Master Marcus, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's a problem with the water pressure upstairs. The plumber will need access to the pipes behind your study wall." Evangeline's voice carried clearly through the door. "Can't it wait? We're having such a lovely afternoon." "I'm afraid not, ma'am. The whole 2nd floor could flood if we don't address it immediately." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of movement. The door opened and Evangeline emerged, supporting a confused-looking Marcus. He seemed unsteady on his feet, his usually sharp awareness dulled and unfocused. "We'll just move to the living room, darling," Evangeline cooed. "You can rest on the sofa while they fix the pipes." As soon as they were gone, Sarah slipped into the study, installing tiny cameras and audio equipment with practiced efficiency. Isabelle watched Marcus disappear around the corner, her heart breaking at how diminished he looked, like a shadow of the strong, intelligent man she'd fallen in love with. "How long does scopolamine stay in the system?" she whispered. "Depends on the dose and frequency," Sarah replied grimly. "But if she's been giving it to him regularly, we're looking at cumulative effects. Memory problems, personality changes, possible permanent cognitive damage. They had to work fast." The evidence Sarah collected over the next day was damning. Audio recordings of Evangeline coaching Marcus through false memories, video of her adding white powder to his tea, phone calls to Dr. Reeves discussing maintaining the patient's docility. Most damning of all was a recording of Evangeline talking to herself while she thought Marcus was sleeping. "Soon you won't remember her at all," her voice crooned through the speakers. "She'll be nothing but a bad dream, and I'll be your perfect wife, the way it should have been from the beginning." But when Sarah tried to present the evidence to the police, they ran into a wall of bureaucratic indifference and Blackwood money. "It's a domestic dispute," the detective said dismissively. "Wife says the other woman is a delusional imposter who's been stalking her husband. She has marriage certificates, witness statements, family photos. What do you have? Some recordings that could be taken out of context, and wild accusations from a woman with admitted mental health issues." Isabelle felt the trap closing around her. Evangeline had been thorough, painting her as unstable and potentially dangerous while positioning herself as the victim. "There has to be something we can do," she said desperately. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "There is, but it's risky and it requires you to trust me completely." "What is it?" "We make Evangeline confess, on camera with witnesses, in a way she can't deny or spin." Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. "We're going to throw her a party." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Sarah had discovered that the Blackwoods' annual charity masquerade ball was scheduled for that weekend, an event Evangeline couldn't cancel without raising suspicions. Using her contacts in the catering industry, Sarah arranged for Isabelle to work the event as part of the serving staff. "The beauty of a masquerade," Sarah explained, "is that everyone expects deception. Hidden faces, secret identities, people pretending to be someone they're not. She'll never see you coming." Isabelle spent the afternoon before the ball preparing. The staff uniform, black dress, white apron, simple mask, made her nearly invisible among the other servers. More importantly, Sarah had equipped her with recording equipment and a plan to force Evangeline's hand. The ballroom was transformed into something from a fairy tale, all golden light and swirling fabric. Guests moved through the space like exotic birds, their elaborate masks and costumes hiding identities while revealing character. Isabelle recognized several faces from the social pages: politicians, business leaders, socialites who treated charity work like a competitive sport. Marcus stood near the main staircase, magnificent in his black tuxedo and simple silver mask. But even from across the room, Isabelle could see the changes Evangeline had wrought. He moved more slowly, spoke less, smiled with automatic politeness rather than genuine warmth. The vibrant, intelligent man she'd known was being slowly erased. Evangeline swept through the crowd like a queen holding court, resplendent in a gold gown that emphasized her figure and a jeweled mask that didn't hide her beauty so much as frame it. She stayed close to Marcus, her hand possessive on his arm, her voice a constant whisper in his ear. "Remember, darling, you met the Weatherbys at our engagement party," she murmured as they approached another couple. "You were so charming that night, telling them about our honeymoon plans." Marcus nodded vaguely, the lie becoming truth through repetition and chemical persuasion. Isabelle circulated through the crowd with champagne and canapes, invisible in her servant's role, working her way closer to her target. The plan required perfect timing. She needed to get Evangeline alone, away from Marcus and witnesses, at exactly the right moment. The opportunity came when Marcus needed assistance to the restroom. Evangeline guided him partway, then handed him off to a male attendant, giving her a few moments alone. She moved to the terrace for air, stepping into the shadows beyond the French doors. "Evangeline." Her sister turned, startled, then smiled when she recognized the voice despite the mask. "Hello, darling. I thought I told you never to come back. I couldn't stay away. Not when I saw what you were doing to him." "What I'm doing to him?" Evangeline laughed, the sound bright and terrible. "I'm saving him. From the trauma of your deception, from the confusion of conflicting memories. Soon he'll remember only the truth, that he married me, loved me, chose me. It's not the truth." "You're poisoning him." "I'm healing him." Evangeline stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you know what he said to me this morning? He said he couldn't remember why he'd ever doubted our love. He said he felt like he was waking up from a nightmare." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Your memory is the nightmare, Isabelle, and soon it will be gone forever. He'll figure it out eventually. Someone will notice." "No one will notice because there's nothing to notice. Marcus Blackwood is simply recovering from his accident with the loving care of his devoted wife." Evangeline examined her manicured nails with clinical detachment. In a few more weeks, the dosage can be reduced. He'll remember our courtship, our wedding, our perfect marriage. The confused period after his accident will fade into vague unpleasantness, easily explained by trauma and medication. And if he doesn't recover completely, if the damage is permanent? Evangeline shrugged. Then he'll need his wife more than ever. How tragic, how romantic, the devoted spouse caring for her beloved invalid. I'll be saint and martyr both. The casual cruelty of it took Isabelle's breath away. How can you claim to love him and still do this? Because this is what love is. The words exploded from Evangeline with sudden violence. Love is taking what you want and keeping it, no matter the cost. Love is being willing to destroy anyone who tries to take what's yours. Her voice dropped to a deadly whisper. You think your version of love was pure? Your lies and deception and theft? At least I'm honest about my methods. My feelings for him were never lies. Your feelings don't matter. What matters is that he's mine now, and he'll stay mine. Evangeline pulled out a small vial filled with white powder. Tonight's dose, mixed into his nightcap. By morning, he won't even remember this conversation, or you. The confession was perfect, damning, recorded in crystal clarity by the devices Sarah had provided. But as Isabelle started to back away, to escape with the evidence that would finally expose her sister, Evangeline's expression changed. You're recording this. It wasn't a question. Panic shot through Isabelle's veins. I don't know what you mean. The slight bulge under your dress, the way you've been angling your body toward me, the fact that you came here at all. Evangeline's smile was the most terrifying thing Isabelle had ever seen. Oh, darling sister, did you really think you could outmaneuver me? She pulled out her phone, typing rapidly. Moments later, men in dark suits appeared from the shadows. Security guards, but not the kind employed by the venue. These gentlemen work for some very discreet associates of mine, Evangeline explained conversationally. They specialize in making problems disappear. You, dearest Isabelle, have become quite the problem. The security guards moved toward Isabelle with professional efficiency, but she'd been expecting this possibility. Sarah's training over the past few days had included more than just surveillance techniques. The small canister of pepper spray hidden in her apron was military grade. The first guard went down clutching his face, his screams echoing across the terrace. The second hesitated just long enough for Isabelle to dart past him, racing back toward the ballroom. Behind her, Evangeline's voice rose in manufactured panic. Help! Someone help! That woman attacked my security. She's dangerous. The ballroom erupted into chaos as Isabelle burst through the French doors, still clutching her recording equipment. Guests scattered, women screaming, men shouting questions. In the confusion, she spotted Marcus near the bar, his face a mask of bewilderment as he tried to process the sudden violence. Marcus, she called out, pulling off her servant's mask as she ran toward him. He turned toward her voice, and for just a moment, one crystalline moment, his expression cleared. Recognition flashed in his eyes, not of Evangeline, but of her, the woman who had read to him by firelight and described flowers with a poet's tongue. Isabelle, her real name, spoken with wonder and confusion and something that might have been relief. But then Evangeline was there, beautiful and distraught, throwing herself into his arms. Darling, thank God you're safe. She's been stalking us for weeks. My poor delusional sister, convinced she's married to you instead of me. Evangeline's performance was flawless, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice trembling with convincing fear. The doctor said she might become violent, but I never thought, that's not true, Isabelle shouted, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Security guards, real ones this time, were already moving toward her, hands reaching for weapons. She did the only thing she could think of. She activated the recording device's emergency broadcast function, the one Sarah had installed as a last resort. Suddenly, Evangeline's voice filled the ballroom through the sound system. Love is taking what you want and keeping it, no matter the cost. Love is being willing to destroy anyone who tries to take what's yours. The ballroom fell silent except for the damning words pouring from hidden speakers. Tonight's dose mixed into his nightcap. By morning, he won't even remember this conversation, or you. All eyes turned to Evangeline, whose face had gone perfectly white beneath her gold mask. I'm healing him. Do you know what he said to me this morning? He said he couldn't remember why he'd ever doubted our love. Marcus stepped away from Evangeline, his expression clearing as the words penetrated the chemical fog in his mind. What is this? But Evangeline had always been quick to adapt. Her tears dried instantly, replaced by cold calculation. Clever, sister mine, but recordings can be faked, voices can be mimicked. She pulled out her phone again, and this time the image that appeared on the ballroom's main screen was devastating. Marcus and Isabelle in an intimate embrace, clearly photographed without their knowledge. These, however, are quite real. Photos of my husband's affair with my mentally unstable sister, a woman who has been impersonating me for months. Gasps echoed through the crowd. The society photographers present began snapping pictures furiously, already calculating the value of this scandal. She seduced him while I was away caring for our sick father, Evangeline continued, her voice pitched perfectly for maximum sympathy. When I returned, I found them together and tried to help Marcus recover from her manipulation. This recording is her desperate attempt to avoid responsibility for her own crimes. It was masterful deflection, turning victim into aggressor, truth into lie. The crowd was already beginning to murmur, some nodding in agreement, others pulling out phones to record the drama. But Marcus was no longer listening to Evangeline. He was staring at Isabelle with growing clarity, memories fighting through the chemical haze. The jade elephant, he said suddenly. What, darling? Evangeline's mask of composure flickered. The jade elephant on my windowsill? You didn't know about it when I asked, and you looked confused when I mentioned it. His voice grew stronger with each word. And the scar on my shoulder? You claimed we'd made love, but you didn't know about the scar from my riding accident. Marcus, you're confused. The bergamot and white tea, he continued, taking another step toward Isabelle. You always smelled like bergamot and white tea? She smells like. He turned back to Evangeline, nostrils flaring. Like roses and amber. The crowd was riveted now, watching the drama unfold like spectators at a tennis match. Society scandals didn't get much juicier than this. Evangeline made one last desperate play. He's been drugged, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. My sister has been poisoning his mind against me with hallucinogens. That's why he's confused, why his memories are scrambled. I have the medical records to prove it. It was a brilliant move, using the truth of the drugging while assigning blame to the wrong person. Several guests nodded knowingly, murmuring about the lengths jealous women would go to. But Sarah Chen stepped out from behind a marble pillar, holding a small device that projected new images onto the screen. Security. Footage from inside the Blackwood mansion. These were taken yesterday, Sarah announced in a clear, professional voice. As you can see, Mrs. Evangeline Blackwood is adding an unknown substance to her husband's tea. The substance has been tested and confirmed to be scopolamine, commonly known as devil's breath, a drug used to erase memory and induce suggestibility. The footage was damning. Evangeline checking to make sure she was alone, measuring powder from a small vial, stirring it carefully into Marcus's cup. Her face was clearly visible, her actions deliberate and premeditated. The crowd's murmur shifted from sympathetic to horrified. Someone called for the police. Someone else was already live-streaming the event to social media. Evangeline looked around the ballroom like a trapped animal, seeing her carefully constructed lies crumbling around her. Her beautiful face contorted with rage and desperation. Fine, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Fine. Yes, I drugged him. Yes, I stole my sister's identity. Yes, I've been manipulating his memories. She laughed, the sound high and brittle. But do you know why? Because I loved him first. Because I was supposed to marry him, supposed to have his children, supposed to live in his beautiful house and be his perfect wife. She whirled toward Isabelle, her composure finally completely shattered. You always got everything. Papa's attention, teacher's praise, everyone's love. You were the special one, the talented one, the one everyone remembered. Tears streamed down her face, genuine at last. I worked so hard to be perfect, to be worthy, and still it was never enough. Still, you were the one they loved? The raw pain in her voice made several people step back. This wasn't the polished socialite anymore. This was a woman cracking apart from years of jealousy and desperation. So yes, I took what should have been mine, and I would have kept it, would have made Marcus happy in my own way if you hadn't ruined everything with your meddling conscience. She pulled the vial of scopolamine from her purse, holding it up like a weapon. But if I can't have him, if I can't have the life I deserve, then no one can. She moved with sudden, terrifying speed toward Marcus, the open vial raised to dash its contents in his face. At that concentration, Isabelle realized with horror, the drug would likely harm him. Marcus was still mortified with the truth and fixated towards Isabelle's direction, and his blindness making him helpless against the attack he couldn't see coming. But Isabelle was already moving, launching herself between them just as Evangeline's hand swung forward. The vial's contents splashed across Isabelle's handarm instead, the liquid burning through fabric and skin as she knocked Evangeline backward. Evangeline stumbled, the empty vial flying from her hand to shatter against the marble floor. The crowd gasped and scattered as security finally reached them, restraining Evangeline as she struggled and screamed. "Enough," he said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. "It's over, Evangeline." She collapsed then, all the fight going out of her at once. She sank to her knees beside the broken vial, sobbing with the raw, ugly sound of a person who had lost everything, and finally, understood the price of her choices. 9 months later, the morning light streaming through the hospital windows felt different somehow. Softer, more golden, full of promise. Marcus sat in the hospital bed, bandages covering his eyes, his hands gripping the sheets with barely contained anticipation. "The experimental surgery was more successful than we dared hope," Dr. Patterson explained to Isabelle, who stood beside the bed holding Marcus's hand. "The new optical implants have integrated perfectly with his remaining optical nerves. When we remove the bandages, he should have nearly full vision restored. It had been a long road to this moment. The scopolamine poisoning had been successfully treated, but it was during his recovery that doctors discovered something unexpected. The original accident that had cost Marcus his sight had caused less permanent damage than initially believed. New surgical techniques, combined with revolutionary implant technology, offered a chance at restoration. "Are you ready?" Dr. Patterson asked. Marcus nodded, though Isabelle could see his hands trembling slightly. She squeezed his fingers, feeling her own heart racing. The doctor began unwrapping the bandages with careful precision. Layer after layer fell away until finally, only a thin gauze pad remained over each eye. "Now I want you to keep your eyes closed when I remove these last pieces," Dr. Patterson instructed. "The light will be very bright at first. Open them slowly when you're ready." He lifted away the final bandages. Marcus sat perfectly still for a moment, his eyes still closed as if afraid that opening them would shatter the dream. Then, with infinite care, he opened his eyes. The sharp intake of breath that followed was the most beautiful sound Isabelle had ever heard. "I can see," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "I can see the light." His gaze moved slowly around the room, taking in the hospital equipment, the windows, the doctor's smiling face. But when his eyes finally found Isabelle, he went completely still. She stood beside his bed in a simple blue dress, her dark hair catching the morning sunlight, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was exactly as beautiful as he had imagined during all those months of knowing her only by touch and scent and sound. But seeing her face, really seeing her, was like experiencing color for the first time. "Isabelle," he breathed, reaching up to touch her cheek with trembling fingers. "You're so beautiful, more beautiful than I ever dreamed," she laughed through her tears. "You say that like you're surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm overwhelmed." His voice cracked with emotion. "All those months, I built an image of you in my mind from your voice, your touch, the way you moved through our home. But seeing you now, it's like meeting you all over again." He studied her face with the intensity of someone memorizing a precious work of art, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she was happy. "I love the way you bite your lip when you're thinking," he said suddenly, and she realized she was doing exactly that. "I always wondered what it looked like." Patterson cleared his throat gently. "I'll leave you two alone for a few minutes, but don't overdo it. Your eyes will need time to fully adjust." After he left, Marcus struggled to sit up straighter, never taking his eyes off Isabelle's face. "There's something I need to tell you," he said urgently. "Something I've been waiting to say until I could see you when I said it." "Marcus, no, let me say this." He took her hands in both of his, looking directly into her eyes. "I fell in love with you in the dark, Isabelle. I fell in love with your heart, your soul, the essence of who you are. The blindness was a gift in a way, because it meant I could never be distracted by anything superficial. I knew you, really knew you, before I ever saw your face. Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but she was smiling. But now, he continued, his voice soft with wonder, now I get to fall in love with you all over again. With the way your eyes change color in different light, with the graceful way you move, with the expressions that cross your face when you think no one is watching. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing gentle kisses to her knuckles. I get to spend the rest of my life discovering new things about you to love. You already know everything important, she whispered. Do I? Do I know what you look like when you wake up in the morning? What your face looks like when you're working in the garden, or reading a good book, or creating a new fragrance? His smile was radiant. I have so much to learn about you, Mrs. Blackwood. She laughed, the sound bright with joy. Well, you have the rest of our lives for that. The rest of our lives, he repeated, as if testing the words. I can see your face when you say that. I can see how much you mean it. He reached up to frame her face with his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I love you, Isabelle. All of you. The woman who saved me in the darkness, and the woman I'm seeing now in the light. When he kissed her, it was with the reverence of a man who had been given back not just his sight, but his whole world. If you enjoyed this story, kindly like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more. See you next time.